The unveiling of President Obama's $3.8 trillion budget has opened the door to a whole new round of debate in Washington. The proposal does address the health care bill and job creations, but tax revenues for 2010 are expected to be $2.2 trillion. Remember, budget set at 3.8. Tax revenues are at 2.2. That'll leave us with a record deficit. So Joe Krier, president of Krier Wealth Management, is here to discuss the budget, the process that'll change it, and how it will affect your wallet. Good morning, Joe.
Hey, Stacy.
Okay, so how does this figure in when you compare it to budgets from the years past?
You know, they wiggle and they wobble, but they all fall down, pretty much is the way to put that.
What do you mean by that?
It's massive, and the trend is that each one gets bigger than the one before it. You know, you talked about the deficit. Part of that, you know, the average deficit over the last 50 years is 2 to 3% of our total output. So we've been behind the eight ball going back to 1960. This is nothing new. The big challenge here is that they're trying to kickstart an economy and they're trying to revive the jobs market at the same time, and that doesn't really lend itself towards saving money and budget cuts.
A lot of people say, well, some economists would say that in this type of economy, you do need deficit spending. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, part of the reason we're in this big a hole as far as the deficit goes is you have to remember that was a $780 billion stimulus package that was passed last year. So that's money that they just kind of borrowed from themselves, so to speak, plugged it into the economy, and so far it's stabilized the economy, but we're still waiting for something to happen to get the economy going.
Okay, so let's take a look at what this budget is intended to do. Fighting unemployment. It's got small business incentives we talked about last week. Spending for infrastructure. It does raise taxes, especially those who make over $250,000, and also energy producers, huh, Joe?
Yeah, definitely. You know, and they're looking at energy producers just because the numbers are so amazingly large.
Are we talking about oil companies?
Exxon, you name it, you know, and you know, their percentage profits are way smaller than, say, a Microsoft, but the real dollar number, just because of the sheer volume they do, is huge. And the way the federal government looks at that is by skimming a little bit more off the top. That's where they can really pump some money in. And for the income earners over $250,000, they're actually looking for $250 billion to come in from that group.
The Republicans, I heard this morning, said we're going to fight that. Those tax increases are DOA. Do they have a leg to stand on, do you think?
They do. You know, and the win in Massachusetts a couple weeks ago really does change the game there. And as with any legislation that Obama's put on the table, they can just kind of lock it down. And as you and I were saying off camera, there's a good chance this thing gets up to the last minute where they end up with an emergency spending bill to carry things forward. It's just not, you know, the track record of the last year doesn't lend itself to this thing flying through Congress.
And I was also reading that the president can propose these cuts, and then it's up to Congress. For example, they want to cut out the C-17 purchase program. And in the years past that they've tried to do that, the Congress members from that area fight for it, and they don't ultimately cut it out of the budget.
Right. You know, and the president, what he does, he puts a guideline out here, he tosses it over to Congress, their committees take it, they push it around, then they meet in the back room and try to get votes for it, and then ultimately they send something back to the president that may look totally different. He has to review it, and then he either signs it or vetoes it at that point.
Okay, so the president and his administration have to make some assumptions when they are putting all of this together, and their assumptions are that we will have economic growth of 1% plus per year. You see all this, the rest here, Joe. Tax revenues increase, unemployment drops. Yeah. Some economists say this is painting a rosy picture. We don't know if this will really come to fruition.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, you know that, you know, me as a financial advisor, what we do is we plan for the worst and hope for the best. This is kind of the opposite of that. Just like our federal government's been upside down on their budget for over 50 years, they're also planning for the best case scenario. And you and I both know that's plan A. Plan B is pretty much how we live our lives, you know.
I was going to say, I might win the lottery next week too, Joe, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go buy a Lamborghini today.
Yeah, you know, my life is a series of plan B, C, and D all added up, and so is the way the United States is run. I mean,
okay.
You know there's things that are going to happen to change the game here.
It's called making sausage, people. Thanks, Joe. Joe is president of Krier Wealth Management.